Welcome to the G5 Hive and our next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive into the G5 college football landscape with the folks that know the teams the best. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review. Today, we'll be taking a look at the Green Wave of Tulane, who finished last season with an impressive 11-3 record and made an appearance in the Military Bowl. They wrapped up their 2024 spring practice with their spring game on April 20th. We have a special guest joining us today. He is the beat reporter for the Times-Picayune, New Orleans Advocate. He is the publisher of thewavereport.com for rivals. He is Guerry Smith. Guerry can be found at Guer Smith on X. Welcome to the show, Guerry.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks for coming on and talking a little bit of Green Wave football. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you to being interested in sports journalism and covering the Green Wave?
Sure. I was a sports obsessed kid from the time I was 4 years old. I was reading scores in the newspaper, memorizing scores. I grew up in New Orleans. My parents were both Tulane grads. Now, having said that, I never thought I'd ever be covering Tulane because when I left New Orleans to go to college at the University of Florida, I never planned to move back to New Orleans, but ended up getting married to a New Orleans girl who who was never going to leave. So after being gone for about 20 years, I moved back in 2008, and it just worked out that way. As a sports journalist, moving cities is not easy these days with the business hemorrhaging the way it is. But after about 3 years of some tough times, wondering whether I was going to be able to stay in the field, I ended up hooking on with the Times-Picayune New Orleans Advocate, and then I ended up becoming the Tulane beat writer soon after that. I have a lot of institutional knowledge because I went to all their games as a kid with my parents. And when I started the beat, there wasn't much good going for Tulane. This was in 2011, right around there. So times are a lot different now than they were when I first started the beat.
As we mentioned earlier, Tulane had a very impressive season in 2023 and in 2022 for that matter. But with that success, change has come. They lost their AAC Coach of the Year, Willie Fritz, and virtually all the coaching staff to Houston. This offseason, they hired John Summerall, who was previously the head coach at Troy. What can you tell us about Coach Summerall and what he brings to the table for the Green Wave?
I mean, well, it's pretty remarkable, actually, that Willie Fritz won 23 games in the last 2 years and a conference title and made a conference title championship game appearance when they lost to SMU last year. Let's see, what did John Summerall do the last year? Oh yeah, he made 2 conference championship game appearances, won 23 games. The only difference is he won both of his in the Sun Belt. It's an example of how Willie Fritz elevated the program, because John Summerall is considered one of the up and coming coaches in the country, and he had been at Tulane as an assistant coach under Willie Fritz's predecessor, and there's no way he comes back to Tulane if Willie Fritz hadn't done done to the program, what he did the last 2 years. But in the past, every time Tulane had a successful coach and he left, the program went down. It's not going to go down this time with John Summerall. I mean, his credentials are impeccable, and he even knows how to recruit at Tulane, because he was one of their lead recruiters as co-defensive coordinator when he was on the staff before.
So as it often happens when you get a new head coach, that means new assistants and coordinators. Tulane is no different in that regard. Coach Summerall brings over Joe Craddock with him over from Troy, where he served as the OC over there. Can you describe the type of offense that Coach Craddock brings with him and plans to run there at Tulane?
Yeah, I can't totally describe it because, coaches always say this stuff, but he talks about how he coaches to the talent of his players, that he's not he's not wedded to one system. But if you check what he's done, that's kind of true. He's got his career started. He was the youngest offensive coordinator in America at SMU. He went undefeated against Tulane at SMU when he was offensive coordinator. But it's a balanced, diverse offense. They use the tight ends heavily. Tulane had some good tight ends already. And so I would be surprised if he doesn't continue that with the personnel he's inheriting. But it's kind of a physical. It's a run first offense, but it's in college these days. You can't just rely on that. It's balanced, but really he does coach to his personnel. And the best player he's inheriting on Tulane is Mekhi Hughes, their running back, who had an absolutely outstanding breakthrough season last year. It's funny, Tulane fans haven't totally warmed up to him because he's not Tyjae Spears, who was absolutely transcendent. He doesn't have Tyjae Spears' breakaway ability, but he has everything else. He picks holes perfectly. So, I mean, he's a 1,500-yard back if the offensive line blocks for him effectively this year. So I don't really think there are going to be a ton of changes from what Tulane had last year, but he has a bigger track record of success than Willie Fritz's offensive coordinators do. So I think Tulane fans have a lot to be excited for with Craddock.
All right, let's get to the position where it all starts on offense, and that is the quarterback. They lose a good one in AAC Offensive Player of the Year, Michael Pratt, to a different type of green. He's now with the Green Bay Packers. He ended his career as the top 10 in a lot of statistical categories. But let's shift over to the guys that are in this room. Mm-hmm. Kai Horton briefly entered the portal but came back. Justin Ibieta returns to the room, and then they grabbed Ty Thompson from the transfer portal. He was at Oregon previously. What can you tell us about this room and how things went this spring?
Yeah, well, first let's for this year, let's cross out Justin Ibieta because he broke his leg in a horrible way in the bowl game. It's not clear whether he's ever going to be able to play again. He's still on the team, but he may end up accepting a medical disqualification where he stays in school on scholarship. Regardless, he isn't going to be playing this year. But Ty Thompson's another example of John Sumrall's magic as a recruiter, because Willie Fritz wasn't getting a guy like Ty Thompson to come in when he was coaching. Ty Thompson was one of the top 10 quarterbacks in the country coming out of high school. Went to Oregon for 3 years, didn't play much. He was obviously behind some really good quarterbacks, and he saw the writing on the wall when the job was could have been his going into this year, and they immediately took two grad transfer quarterbacks in. So he entered the transfer portal. He's not a guy Tulane would have even been in the mix for in the past. Having said that, Kai Horton came back. Kai Horton, he's had some experience in the past. He was a very lightly recruited quarterback when he came to Tulane, but he can make all the throws. He's got a ton of ability. His issue has been focus, consistency during games. And in spring, there wasn't a whole lot of different. Ty Thompson was coming off an ankle injury. He missed the first week and a half of spring practice. He was limited the next week, but then he was full go the rest of spring. And right now officially it's a truly open competition. And I do believe they have not made any decisions, but the reality is they didn't bring a former 5-star high school quarterback, Ty Thompson, in to ride the bench at the beginning of the year. So I'll be pretty surprised if at the beginning of the year, Ty Thompson isn't the starting quarterback. But Kai Horton's good enough that Ty Thompson's going to have to perform when he gets in there at the beginning of the year. I think it's going to be an open comp. He's going to be the starter, even though they're not going to announce it until pretty soon before the start of the season. But it's not going to be he's going to have to prove that he can keep the job, because Kai Horton, he's underrated. He really can make all the throws. He just they just both Willie Fritz and now this staff has just been hammering on him that you can't lose focus. You got to play every play the same. And if he does that, he's got a lot of talent.
You know, you mentioned, and we talked about Kai Horton, briefly entering the portal and then deciding to come back to Tulane. Can you tell us anything about, that decision and what kind of led him to say, hey, this is where I want to be. I want to come back?
Yeah, I mean, I think when he went in the portal, he didn't know who the head coach was going to be. And he had a ball. Tulane did not play well at all in the bowl game against Virginia Tech in the Military Bowl, but Kai Horton played pretty well, and he had fun. He knew. He saw what it could be if he could be the starting quarterback at Tulane. He in the third quarter against Virginia Tech, he ran in for a touchdown to tie the game, and he was celebrating. You could tell then there was no way he was leaving at that point, because he was still in the portal and playing in the game, but he was so invested and involved in that game. And he truly believes he can be the quarterback this year. He knew he was never going to be the starting quarterback with Michael Pratt around, but he believes he can be the guy. He's had a great experience at Tulane to this point, and that's why he stayed. I mean, I think the second they hired John Sumrall, and then Kai Horton got a chance to play that whole bowl game, there was no way he was leaving at that point.
So, you mentioned that you felt like Ty Thompson probably is going to be the winner of the job, but Kai Horton is certainly, a capable quarterback as well. How long do you think that leash might be for Ty Thompson if he struggles early in the season?
Well, because of the schedule, not that long. And Tulane's second game of the year, they host Kansas State, and in a rematch of the game that was the official start of the turnaround of the program, because 2 years ago, Tulane went to Kansas State. Willie Fritz had never beaten a Power 5 opponent in any step of his coaching career. Nobody knew how good Kansas State was going to be that year at the time. In fact, the game was on ESPN Plus. It wasn't even on a network. Tulane won that game, even though Tyjae Spears was injured and was basically used as a decoy in that game. And then Kansas State went on and won the Big 12, but Tulane gained so much confidence from that win. It carried them through their championship season. But anyway, Tulane, they have Kansas State in their second game, and then they go to Norman to play Oklahoma in week 3. So they're going to need really good quarterback play to have a chance in both of those games. And I think we'll know a lot more about who the quarterback is going to be after those 2 games back to back.
Well, let's move over to the running game. This room is highlighted by the return of the AAC. I don't know if you call it Rookie of the Year, the Freshman of the Year. I believe I saw it was Rookie of the Year, Mekhi Hughes. This room has some depth to it. They brought back Shady Clayton Johnson and Arnold Barnes. Arnold Barnes had a lot of hype going into last year as a freshman. This room did lose Iverson Celestine.
Yeah.
He transferred to South Alabama after the spring game. How did the running back room look this spring?
It's deep. It's good. And it's not going to matter how deep it is if Mekhi stays healthy, because he's just got that. You can tell the difference. He's just got that knack. To me, the most important thing about any running back is being able to pick that hole. And he's got that perfect instinct for how to find the hole, even if there's hardly one there, and then get through that hole. And he excels at it. Willie Fritz was a great coach. He had a great staff, but they committed coaching malpractice last year with Mekhi Hughes at the beginning of the year, because it wasn't until week 5 that he started. And what happened was in their opener against South Alabama, he missed a blitz pickup, and Michael Pratt got crushed and fumbled the ball. And coaches, they're obsessed about that. If you're not, they start worrying about that stuff. So for the next 4 weeks, Mekhi Hughes was clearly the best. Every time he came in the game changed. And it wasn't until the conference started that they ended up starting him. And then he had 600, 700-yard games in a row. He's the real deal. But you mentioned Arnold Barnes. He came in as a high school student last year. Came in early in the spring. He's tough. He's physical. The only thing is he's the same type of runner as Mekhi Hughes. Sometimes you want to have a different runner as your backup. They're the same type player. But he showed tremendous improvement in the spring. He wasn't really ready last year in the fall. He was a little too young. And you mentioned Shady Clayton Johnson. At the end of last year, they were using him a lot as a receiver, and he does bring a different dimension. He was a huge recruit coming out of New Orleans in high school, went to Colorado. He has not lived up to that, but he's a really good player. It's a deep room. And again, Mekhi Hughes, he could be conference player of the year this year after being the Rookie of the Year last year.
Now, you've kind of alluded to it, but I want to hear it. This staff did work with 6th-round NFL draft pick Keami Vidal last year. They used him as a workhorse in 2023, much like Vidal. Hughes was used as that workhorse there, as you said, at the back half of that season. Do you expect him to split carries? Do you expect him to be that workhorse?
Yeah, I think he'll be a workhorse if he's healthy, just because as good as these other running backs are good, but he's better. I'm a firm believer. It was funny. Willie Fritz used to always say that the days of running backs getting a lot of carries were over until Tyjae Spears is exploded. And then never heard that again after that. Tyjae Spears was getting the ball. I mean, in the Cotton Bowl, he got the ball 30 times against USC. I think that's going to be the approach. Mekhi Hughes is durable. You don't, running backs only can take so many carries before they get nicked up, but I definitely think Mekhi Hughes is going to be used the exact same way, and will be a workhorse back for this team.
All right, let's move over to the wide receiver room. Standout freshman from a year ago, Chris Brazil transfers to Tennessee. Lawrence Keys III and Jaquan Jackson are gone. I think Jaquan Jackson is now a Tennessee Titan, and they were the number 2 and 3 guys. That means the leading receiver in this room in terms of yards from last year is Joel Keith Brown, who had 391 yards and 2 touchdowns. But they do bring in some transfers via the portal. They brought in Kai Preen from LSU, who didn't arrive until after spring practice. Shaz Preston from Alabama, Mario Williams from USC, and Therese Trainer from Idaho. How did the wide receiver room shape up during the spring?
Yeah, it's more talented than last year's group. But you made a good point. Well, first of all, Chris Brazel's a big loss. He was a terrific player. That's why he's at Tennessee. Now that he would have been gone even if Willie Fritz's staff had stayed. He's a big timer. But again, they brought in Mario Williams. This is another guy that Tulane wouldn't even been in the mix for in the past. This is a guy. He went to Oklahoma, transferred to USC with the coach, and was absolutely tremendous 2 years ago. Struggled a little bit last year, but he's a big timer. He's an NFL caliber receiver. And basically after the first 4 days of spring, they sort of shut him down in terms of they already knew he was going to be the number one receiver on the team and had him kind of coach up the other receivers. You mentioned Joel Keith Brown. Joel Keith Brown was another tremendously high-rated recruit coming out of high school, went to Texas A&M, didn't do a whole lot there, had a very slow start last year, really came on in the second half of the year. He's terrific it's a different system now, but trust me, they'll incorporate him. He's great at those little end-around jet sweeps. That became his staple play. He's a difference maker on those. Bunch of other transfers. Shaz Preston was another huge recruit coming in high school. Now, he's a work in progress because he went to Alabama. Granted, it was Alabama, but he didn't play at all at receiver in 2 years there. So obviously they didn't feel like he was polished yet. But again, a different caliber athlete than Tulane used to have at wide receiver. So I think this crew could be better than last year's, but it has to be proven on the field. Kai Preen had a great touchdown catch in the spring game at LSU. These guys are faster and more talented than Tulane's receivers ever were under Willie Fritz, but they do have to prove it on the field. Other than Mario Williams, they have to prove it on the field. But I have a pretty good feeling that they're going to do it this year.
So I'm assuming that Mario Williams is going to play in the slot. Who do you think the two outside guys are going to be?
Yeah, Joel Keith Brown and Shaz Preston if he starts. And the other guy you mentioned, he left after spring. The guy from Idaho. Yeah, but he left because they told him. I mean, he just didn't do much. They had him and a guy from UCF that transferred in. It's the new thing, these tryouts, where guys come in for spring practice and then they're gone right after it. But that was the case. They didn't move up. They were kind of told they were not starters in the spring, and I think they decided that Tulane wasn't the right fit for them because they might not get a lot of playing time this year.
Sure.
Well, let's move over to the tight ends. You described earlier that, hey, these tight ends are going to be utilized heavily. Can you describe that a little bit more of what you saw there in the spring?
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't see a whole lot in the spring because they had a lot of injuries at the position. But I went into the history and Troy used their tight end quite a bit, and Tulane has a bunch of good ones. Okay, I'm having a moment here. I'm blanking out on Tulane starting tight end's name.
Alex
Bowman.
Reggie
Brown.
Sorry about that. Alex Bowman. He also had entered the transfer portal when Willie Fritz left, and the second he did the research on this coaching staff and what they do, and he came back to Tulane out of the transfer portal. He can be a big time player. Of course, his big moment was he caught the winning touchdown against USC in the Cotton Bowl, right on the ground in the final seconds to win that game, after also making a big play earlier in the drive on a 3rd and 10 situation. He was nicked up last year, so he didn't have great stats, but he's a guy that he could catch 40 passes and be a huge factor at tight end, and they really like him a lot. And they've got about 3 or 4 other guys that are in the mix that can play some too, but I think Alex Bauman's going to have. I had predicted last year that he was going to lead the team to catches. That didn't look so good by the end of the year, but they actually, their offense really, it was. For all the talent they had last year, their offense, for whatever reason, really struggled for most of last year until they had to make a play in crucial situations. They had so many close games. they really did have a hangover effect from winning the conference championship and having everybody going after them. One game after the other, they could have lost in the regular season in conference, and they managed to win them all. But Alex Bowman didn't have the year I thought he would last year, but I think he'll have what I thought was going to happen last year. I think he's going to have this year.
Can you describe for our listeners a little bit more about like what Reggie Brown does? Is he more of a pass catcher, run blocker? And then they brought in Anthony Miller from Indiana. And is he like a pass catcher, run blocker?
He did. Anthony Miller didn't do a whole lot at Indiana. Obviously, they believe in him. They think he's going to be good. Reggie Brown, he looked pretty good in the spring. He was one of the guys that was injured for a good portion of the spring. But yeah, he's got a lot of he's one of those guys. He can get down the field he's one of those guys who can catch those seam routes and get 20, 30 yards, not just a possession tight end type guy. He's got a little bit more speed than Bauman does. I think he's probably going to be tight end number 2. But again, they've got about 4 or 5 guys, and we'll see how that all works out.
So considering the coaching changes, kind of interesting to see Tulane didn't get hit hard by the portal at the offensive line. They do lose 2 AAC first-team all-conference players in Sincere Hainsworth and Cameron Wire to graduation. They played center and left tackle respectively, but they bring back right tackle Rashad Green, left guard Shadre Hurst, and right guard Josh Rimitic. And then they bring in some transfers too. What can you tell us about this unit in the spring, and are they ready to roll in this new offense?
I think so. The offensive line was one of those areas. It wasn't great last year. They were up and down, and Michael Pratt got hit hard a lot early in the year. He ended up with he got injured because on the play where he scrambled in the fourth quarter against South Alabama with a big lead and got his knee hurt, and it actually affected his knee the whole rest of the year. And that wasn't on the offensive line. But I think they made a key move. They want to win a conference championship this year, and after spring drills, John Summerall knew they had to get a left tackle. They really didn't have a clear starting left tackle on the roster, and then the guy they had lining up all spring at first string, Trey Tuggle, tore his ACL or a significant knee injury in the last week of spring drills, so he probably won't even be able to play this year. They found a guy they're pretty sure can do the job. They got Derek Graham, who was their starting left tackle at Troy last year, and he brings a different level of athleticism than Tulane's seen at that position before, because his last significant play was catching a touchdown pass in the bowl game against Duke, where he had to make an athletic catch on a poor pass. Again, he was at Texas A&M in the spring, apparently just a tryout. He entered the portal, and Tulane grabbed him, and I think he's gonna be an upgrade at the position. They already know what he can do. He had an excellent year at Troy, and that was one of they had 2 huge needs at the end of spring drills. Three actually that they knew they had to address to be a championship team. One was left offensive tackle. They got Derek Graham. 2 was rush end. We'll get to that in a minute. The edge rusher, and then 3 they had to get a kicker because they didn't have one, and they addressed all 3 needs. I mean, they've got 12 transfers since the end of spring practice from the portal, and they had 10 come in before. I think they were rated as the second best group of 5 conference transfer class behind Memphis by one group, and barely behind Memphis. This is the best transfer class Tulane's ever had, and other than some guys that left for Houston and Chris Brazel who went to Tennessee, they didn't lose a whole lot in the transfer portal. This is going to be the most talented roster Tulane's had in ages. Much less experience though than last year, so we'll have to see how it gels as the year goes on.
They brought in Vince Murphy. From Western Kentucky. Is he going to be the starting center this year?
He's going to be the starting center. And he played all spring. I'm not sure he's at the same level as Derek Graham, but he's a solid starter. They were happy with him in the spring. The one position that they had to fill was left tackle, and they did that. Now I'm not sure. I don't know if they're not that deep on the offensive line, so they're going to need to stay healthy up front. But if they stay healthy up front, I think they're going to have their best offensive line in several years too.
All right, if you had to pick an offensive player to have a breakout type season in 2024, who would that be?
Well, I already mentioned Alex Bauman, but I picked him last year, and that didn't work out too well. I mean, breakout. I think Mario Williams is going to have an unbelievable year at Tulane. He's already proven himself. Now he dropped a lot of passes at USC last year, but there was something dysfunctional going on at USC entirely last year. He showed no signs of that in the spring. And he's also, you sometimes wonder if a guy comes from USC to Tulane, is he going to be about himself? Is he going to feel like he's bigger than the program? He was none of that at all. In fact, he was helping coach the other guys. I think he's going to have a tremendous year. I think he might have numbers similar to what Chris Brazel did last year. Yeah, and obviously Mekhi Hughes, he can't have a breakout year because he already broke out last year.
He can have even bigger year, right? So I mean, in a sense, I guess he can, right?
Yeah.
Especially like you said, potential for conference player of the year.
Yeah, I mean, I really do think if he stays healthy, I think he could get 1,500 yards this year. So I guess, that's breakout.
All right. Moving over to the defensive side of the ball, as you might expect, there's a new coach leading the way for the Tulane defense, and that is Greg Gasparato. Mm-hmm. He comes to Tulane from Troy as well, where he served as a defensive coordinator. And Troy has been known for their stellar defenses over the past few years. What can you tell our listeners of the style of defense we can expect to see from Coach Gasparato? Yeah,
it's going to be pretty much what Tulane ran last year, because Tulane's defensive coordinator last year was John Sumrall's defensive coordinator at Troy the previous year. And they talked about that, how easy it was, the terminology and everything else. Usually when a new defensive coordinator comes in, everything changes. Obviously, every defensive coordinator is different, but the similarities were striking from what Tulane ran last year to what they're running this year. Because look, John Sumrall's a defensive coach too. So any defensive coordinator he has is going to run what John Sumrall wants to run too. So it's going to be, an aggressive. All coaches say that too. It's going to be an aggressive defense. Stop the run first, but the key is getting a pass rush. And Tulane has addressed that in the transfer portal, because the biggest concern going into Tulane had nobody returning that had more than one sack last year at defensive end, because they lost one guy to TCU, another guy to Houston, and another guy to the draft, who was never going to get drafted in the first place. It was a terrible decision, but that's going to be the key. I mean, Gasparato, it doesn't matter who the defense coordinator is. If you don't have a pass rush, you're gonna struggle defensively, and that's going to be the key. But basically, Tulane, they're going to be the same defense they were last year in terms of scheme.
Well, let's move over to that line, and you kind of mentioned it. Devine Deal headed over to TCU. Yeah. Keith Cooper Jr. followed the staff over to Houston, and then AAC first-teamer all-conference Darius Hodges is off to the NFL. But there is some experience returning for the Green Wave in 2024 with guys like AAC first-team all-conference Patrick Jenkins. You got Eric Hicks Jr., Cameron Hamilton, among others. How did that unit look in the spring, and did anybody stand out to you?
Looked really good. The defensive tackles they're going to be the strength of the defense. Patrick Jenkins is an incredible football player. He's another. He was at TCU. Tulane does not win the Cotton Bowl against USC 2 years ago if he doesn't break through the line and get a safety, which was literally the only way Tulane was going to win that game. USC could have actually dropped the ball on the end zone and let Tulane recover it and tie the game, and USC would have gone down the field and kicked a field goal to win the game in the end. But that gave the ball back to Tulane, its offense, and they were able to go down and get the winning touchdown. But I think Jenkins is going to have a tremendous year. They've got another guy who did not have a great spring, but who is going to be a huge big timer, Adonis Freelow. And then in the last week of fall camp 2 years ago, he tore his ACL. When he came back, he wasn't the same player. Last year, he wasn't the same player last year. He didn't look great in the spring either, but those things can take 2 years sometimes to recover from. This was a guy they thought that Willie Fritz thought was going to be an NFL player before his injury. If he comes back, if he can get to anywhere close to the level he had before, they're going to have the best set of defensive tackles in the conference. Because you mentioned Eric Hicks is a good player in the middle. They're loaded at that position. They're talented and deep, and they're set there. Obviously, that should help. if you can't stop teams up the middle, you're in trouble too. They're set there. I think Tulane's run defense, as long as their defensive ends are functional at that position, Tulane's going to be really good at stopping the run this year.
Do you see any of the transfers that can maybe crack this offensive or this defensive lineup here? I mean, you got a couple. There's one from Troy that comes over, and then Tennessee State and Louisiana Monroe.
Yeah, it's the new guys. The guy from Troy is really talented, but he's very young. He's from New Orleans. And in the spring, he showed some flashes, but he wasn't. I think he's probably a year away. They got 3 guys from the transfer portal who come in with 2 of them with incredible numbers at a slightly lower level. But these guys, I think they're big timers. I mean, Terrell Allen from Tennessee State. I mean, he put up ridiculous numbers. I mean, 28.5 tackles for loss, 14.5 sacks. I think that'll get it done. Obviously, it's a step up, no doubt about that. But I think he's going to be. That's going to be huge because Darius Hodges was their best pass rusher the last couple of years. He was kind of inconsistent, kind of got up for big games, sometimes not as much in other games. I think Terrell Allen probably will be an upgrade on him as long as he can handle the transition. And then Aiden Huntington, all Tulane did was beat out Oklahoma for his services. Oklahoma gave him an offer he was at ULM last year. He had 8.5 sacks. And I think he's better than anybody that Tulane had in the spring. That's 2 guys right there. Then they got another guy, Javon Carter from Grambling, who's from Louisiana. Harder to read with him. He had 4 sacks last year. Which is still 3 more than any Tulane player returning had at the position. But as long as 2 of those guys can play, they don't even have to be great, but as long as they can provide some pass rush, this will be a complete defense. But it's still a concern going in because you don't know how the adjustment is going to be. But it wasn't just a concern at the end of spring practice. It was a deal that was going to keep them from winning a conference championship if they didn't hit the transfer portal.
All right, moving over to the linebackers, they do suffer some losses, but they bring back the duo of Jesus Machado and Tyler Grubbs. Machado and Grubbs were the top 2 tacklers for Tulane in 2023. How did the linebacker group look in the spring?
They look good now. Machado, I'm hearing he could be a question mark. He also tore his ACL in the Military Bowl last year. He was never going to practice in the spring, but he was expected back at the beginning of the year. It's a little murky on that now. There's been nothing official on it, but I've heard he may have had a setback at some point in his recovery. So it's a little unclear what his status is going to be. But if he does return, they're obviously they're set at that position. They had a bunch of young guys showed some pretty good signs in the spring. They had a bunch of young guys under Willie Fritz that obviously they didn't play a whole lot last year, but he thought every one of his linebacker recruits were going to end up being stars. And so I think it's going to end up being a position of strength for Tulane, but certainly Jesus Machado. I mean, he had 20 more tackles than anybody else last year. They need him. It'll be a blow if he isn't back for the season because he's definitely a difference maker.
Did any of the young guys kind of step up, next to Grubbs, I guess, that you would?
Not specific. I mean, they've got about six or seven guys. It wasn't clear for sure which one was going to be the guy, but we'll have to wait and see on that. I mean, definitely, Grubbs is definitely the key, and they do need Machado to get back to full strength.
Well, let's talk about this defensive backfield. It was very experienced in 2023. 2024, they brought back Bailey Dispani, but this group had a lot of graduates, including AAC first-team All-Conference Guerry Monroe. You got second-teamer Lance Robinson. How did the staff address those key losses?
Yeah, that's probably the most unsettled position on the team. Bailey Dispani, he's been a surprise. I think he's been better than he was projected. He had a very solid year last year. At safety, they're pretty solid. But cornerback, their best cornerback in the spring was a guy named Rishi Ratan, who is a walk-on, and he's in his 5th year now. He was not a guy that was ever expected to be a player. I used to talk about, he probably leads the team in practice interceptions over the years, but it never translated into actual. They were never confident enough to use him in games. So he's probably going to be given a scholarship at the before the season starts, but that position is wide open for them because nobody else. They had a lot of injuries at that position. Lou Tillery played in the spring. A bunch of guys. None of those guys have proven anything in terms of proven college production. And Jarius Monroe was a tremendous player. And that to me is probably the biggest concern for the team going into the year, assuming these Russian guys are going to live up to their numbers. But then at the same time last year, I was saying safety was their big concern because they had no proven guys at safety. And then their safeties actually had an excellent year last year, led with Bailey Despaney starting that. But they don't have any. That's the one position they have no idea who their stars are going to be right now at cornerback. There's about 8-9 guys. They hit the transfer portal there too, brought in some guys, but not guys with the incredible numbers to proven numbers. It's going to be an absolute free for all at cornerback going into fall practice.
All right. If you had to pick a defensive player to have a breakout type season in 2024, who would that be?
Yeah. I think Tyler Grubbs is going to really have a monster year this year. He was a bit of a freelancer last year. He had big numbers, but he kind of did his own thing a lot of times. And I think new system sort of, again, it's pretty similar to last year, but I think he's really meshed well with the new coaching staff. They really trust him. He had unbelievable numbers every year he was at Louisiana Tech before he came to Tulane. Yeah. He says he doesn't, but he had a little chip on his shoulder because he was a New Orleans product. Tulane didn't recruit him at all coming out of high school. Willie Fritz said that was one of his biggest mistakes. They didn't think he was a Division I caliber player. And then he went to Louisiana Tech and put up 100+ tackles every year and was pretty close to that at Tulane last year. I think he's a guy, he could hit that 100 number level this year. And I think, and he did, he made plays last year, but he also made some mistakes. If he can cut out the mistakes, he's going to be an all conference caliber player.
With the spring practice now over and, we've had some transfers come in here after spring, which position group or groups do you still feel is most concerning?
Yeah. I mean, cornerback, defensive end, and offensive tackle, just if anything happens to Derek Graham, they're really, really thin at that position. Cause I'm not sure they were sold on Trey Tuggle as being their starting left tackle. And then he went down with a serious injury anyway. So, it's tough to win a championship if you're not strong at left tackle. So on offense, I think I don't see any concerns in any other position on offense. Obviously quarterback, neither Ty Thompson or Kai Horton are proven as successful college quarterbacks, but I think the coaches feel pretty good about that position. And on defense, again, when you return, their pass rush wasn't great last year, and then when you lose all your top guys from that position, that's a concern. So the new guys have to be productive there. And then, but to me, the biggest concern, as I just mentioned, is cornerback, because their cornerbacks, they could take a lot of risks on defense last year because they knew their cornerbacks were going to be able to cover guys one-on-one. They don't have that same confidence going into this year because they don't have anybody that's proven at that position. So I definitely that's going to be the key right there, if you ask me.
Now, there are a couple people that are probably still out there in the portal that maybe still looking for a home. Is there anything that this coaching staff's looking to add to the team, or are they pretty well set?
I think with 22 guys coming in, they're pretty well set. 12 in the they're actually, I mean, this always works its way out. They're a couple over the scholarship limit right now. I think they're at 87, but that'll work its way out before the year. And I would say if there was another offensive tackle out there that they felt like could be productive, they wouldn't they might add there, but I think they're pretty set. And the one guy I didn't mention, Jake, they brought in a kicker from Louisiana Tech, Jacob Barnes, because they had walk-ons in the spring that weren't proven. He's 54 of 68 in his career on field goals, and that's another thing. He doesn't have the strongest leg, but you can't go into games not knowing whether you can make a 35-yard field goal, and they fix that by getting Jacob Barnes. So I would have, because absolutely that would have been at the top of my list, kicker, before they brought in him, because they had basically nothing coming back at that spot.
What would you say is the main strength of this team?
The defensive tackles. Let's start there, and running back. Mekhi Hughes is, again, he doesn't. The key for him is he doesn't need a big hole. He just needs a hole to be productive, and that's huge. And then the defensive tackles. Patrick Jenkins is an SEC caliber defensive. There were some rumors that LSU, which had a need at defensive tackle, was going to go after Patrick Jenkins at the end of spring. I know Tulane was worried about it themselves. That didn't materialize, but he's a difference maker, and he's right at the top of the list right there.
Yeah, it seems like D tackles commanding a pretty high price.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
in the transfer portal.
Yeah. No, it's insane. It's a different world now.
So we've seen how the portal has made its impact on Tulane this offseason, but when it comes to the recruitment of new players and the retention of existing players, how has NIL impacted Tulane?
But that's one of the huge factors for Tulane in their improvement, because if NIL had come in about 10 years ago, Tulane would have been sunk, because their administrative structure, their support system, everything else, Tulane would have stuck its head in the sand and figured, well, we'll get by without doing a whole lot in this. Tulane was, especially for a G5 school, Tulane was their collective was that was set up was very proactive, and that's, we've seen it in the offseason, because I don't care. John Sumrall, players love playing for him, but if there's not some inducements, if you're behind in that department, you're behind. You're not going to get these guys transferring in. And Tulane, again, just the whole infrastructure in the program, administratively and outside of the school, is just so much better to win than it was a few years ago. There's no way John Sumrall, that they wouldn't have even hired John Sumrall with previous administrations, because it would have been the old Tulane concern of, but he might leave us in a couple of years if he wins. We want to get a guy who's going to stay for a long time. That was the mistake they made in 1998 when Rich Rodriguez thought he was going to be, they went undefeated. He thought he was going to be named head coach, and they went with Chris Salfo because they thought Rich Rodriguez would leave in a couple of years, which he probably would have left in a couple of years, but he would have left a team that was good as opposed to a team that was going 4-8 and 3-9. They didn't make that mistake this time. They identified John Sumrall as their top candidate and went after him. And, you know, if they win big and he leaves in a couple of years, the program's in a heck of a lot better shape than it would be if you hired somebody who's still there.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Like, I feel like the G5s, like, it's very hard to play that long game, right? Because at the end of the day, like, what do you want? You want success. And when you have success, that's going to lead to the coach leaving. That's just how it's going to work. And so it's better. I think it's, like you said, it's better to embrace that than to not. So. Yeah,
I had so many people at the search tell me they didn't think John Sumrall was going to come because Tulane wasn't going to do what it took to get a coach like him, because they were just reading history. But it was both Tulane's collective on the outside and the administration on the inside did everything that you could to make it a job he would want, and he took it. And it's why there hasn't been this level of excitement around Tulane football since the late 1970s and early 80s, when they beat LSU 3 times out of 4 years.
Well, it seems like more and more that the demands of the head coach are really turning into a more of a general manager type role. You know, they have recruiting of high school players. They have to retain their own roster. They have to recruit out of the transfer portal, and they have fundraising as well. And so maybe they're less involved in the X's and O's. What have you been able to notice so far in Coach Sumrall's time there? He's
very involved in the X's and O's. He's an old school coach in a lot of ways, but he's an old school coach that wants to win. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure how he feels about all this new era of the collectives and all of that. But he knows that's what it takes to be successful. But he's definitely a hands-on coach, particularly with his defense. He has strong ideas about what a team needs to do to be successful defensively. And you at practice, he was very, very hands-on in the spring. So, but he does both roles well. You got to do. You're right. that other stuff is probably more important now, the way it is. But he does the overseeing and the administrative stuff and all of that very, very well. But he's never going to stop being a ball coach on the field. That's his passion.
So given all the recent success and all the changes in the coaching staff and personnel, and you mentioned there's a lot of hype around the team this year, what does success look like in 2024 for the Green Wave?
Winning a conference championship this year, because Tulane went 8-0 in the league last year. It was a very shaky 8-0 where, they had to make a play even to beat Tulsa at the end of the game at home. They were trailing UAB big. Rice gave them a scare on the road, but Tulane, with their veteran team, always made the plays to win. The one team that beat them, SMU, is no longer in the league. And the other team that was competing with them, UTSA, their 15-year quarterback in Frank Harris is gone. So John Summerall, when he came in, he made some bold statements about how his goal wasn't only to make the college football, his goal was to make the college football playoff and to win there. But the expectations are high now. This is a team that won the conference championship 2 years ago, hosted the conference championship again last year. They've got the talent to do it. A lot of new parts. Obviously, Michael Pratt, he's a 4-year starter. You don't just replace a 4-year starter and expect the same results no matter who you have. So they're going to have to gel, but definitely I think the overall talent level from top to bottom is higher now than it was 2 years ago when they beat USC in the Cotton Bowl. It's just going to be a matter of, can they get it all together in conference play. But Tulane, last year was the first year in the history of the school that Tulane was picked to win a conference in the preseason. I'm pretty sure that this year I'll be attending AAC Media Days in Dallas again this year. I'm pretty sure Tulane's going to be picked for the second straight year to win the league, and so that's the goal. They win the conference championship.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, but is there anything else you want to share or think that we should know about this 2024 Tulane Green Wave football team?
Yeah, I just think it's fascinating, this early season schedule with Kansas State coming into Yulman Stadium, small stadium. Ole Miss came in last year. Tulane almost beat Ole Miss. Michael Pratt didn't play the game because he'd been injured against South Alabama. You never know how games would have turned out because Ole Miss was a pretty dang good team last year. But Tulane, I think they really feel if Michael Pratt had played that game. It's not that Kai Horton played poorly, but he wasn't Michael Pratt. There was a key play in the second half where he was scrambling on 4th down and had the first down and stepped out of bounds a foot short of the first down and stuff like that. They felt like they could have beaten Ole Miss. Kansas State, probably not as good a team as Ole Miss was last year. That it's just gonna be huge. New coach, a lot of new players. Can Tulane gel quickly enough to beat Kansas State at home in week 2? And then the ultimate test the following week, going to Oklahoma and playing Oklahoma. We're gonna learn a ton about where this team is before conference play even starts. And it's an exciting. Oklahoma was supposed to come to Yulman Stadium 3 years ago. Tulane had never hosted a team like that at this stadium. And then hurricane hit. The game got moved to Norman. Tulane almost won the game there. But so just it's going to be huge for the group of 5 in general and everything else. How Tulane can do in those 2 early games and see if they really are at this level where they can win another conference championship and maybe make some national noise as well.
Well, Gary, we want to thank you again for sharing your time and knowledge with us today.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate you having me.
If you are watching on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening in podcast form, please rate and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you all for your support. And until the next time, we are the G5 Hive.